Welcome to the New Planner Podcast, where it's all about helping you successfully enter the financial planning profession and accelerate your financial planning career. This podcast will help you understand the profession, become familiar with the various career paths available to you, and avoid the mistakes that limit your success. Join your host, Caleb Brown, to explore the human side of creating a successful planning career through interviews, personal experience, and insights from the trenches. Let's get started.
Welcome to the 254th episode of the New Planner Podcast. This is Caleb Brown, your host. My guest today is Daniel Stefanski, who is an associate wealth planner at My Wealth Planners. Daniel joins the show today to share how he accidentally discovered financial planning and how his career has progressed thus far. He shared how he was initially turned off by financial planning, thinking it was only investment sales, but his college required a co-op and he ended up with a financial planning firm during COVID and throughout the rest of his undergrad career. He goes on to share what he learned, why he left, and what his thought process was going into his job search. How he targeted the RIA channel, moved across the country, and even took a pay cut for the right fit. Stay tuned to the end to hear how his current firm has mentored him and helped facilitate his growth. I hope you enjoy this episode with Daniel Stefanski. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the New Planner Podcast.
Hey, Caleb. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to chatting and catching up with you. Just start, if you would, just how you got started in the business and how you became interested in financial planning.
Sure, yeah. So kind of by accident, I'd say. Back when I was in college, I thought financial planning really meant investment management and that the two terms were synonymous, right? So any financial planning job, my thought process was, okay, that's going to be a job where I'm looking at multiple monitors and charts all day, and I'm sitting in a windowless room for 14 hours, essentially.
Hedge fund manager, like a hedge fund, right?
That's more or less what I had thought, before I kind of understood what financial planning was as an industry by itself. So while I was in school, I did what's called a co-op program at St. Joe's University, where I went to school out in Philadelphia. It's essentially a professional development program that undergrads can take where they're able to take all of their classes, but also work year-round and essentially alternate between professional work experiences while also getting your coursework done in the 4-year time commitment. And that's kind of how I found financial planning. I was interviewing my freshman year for a couple of different co-op positions. Most of them as a finance major were just general finance, right? So, hey, you'll be doing, this model in Excel and this will be a lot of the work or whatever the case may be. And a lot of those jobs and interviews really didn't resonate with me. I left kind of thinking, okay, that's a great experience and I'm sure I'll learn something, but I wasn't drawn to it. Lo and behold, my last interview was with a financial planning firm out in Philadelphia. And everything they were saying really resonated with me. They said, it's a mix between working with people and having real conversations, but also getting to nerd out on some of the numbers and the finances a little bit. And I said, okay, well, I'd love to do it. And the co-op was essentially supposed to take place my sophomore year, but this was around COVID. So my second interview with the firm actually in person got canceled. And they did it via Zoom and said, hey, we're actually going to start transitioning all of our business online for the foreseeable future. Would you like to actually start working earlier than you originally were supposed to? So as a freshman in college, I said I'd love to. I got my insurance licenses in Series 65, and then I was off and running as a freshman in college.
Wow, that is awesome. And I mean, like, COVID was obviously a bad time, but the timing helped you get started a little earlier.
100%. I think COVID
Wow.
for a lot of people was a time where, there's a lot of confusion and wasted opportunity and wasted time. But for me, it was really an opportunity to start working and I had nothing else to do. So it was great for me.
So maybe just walk us through for those that aren't, I think more people are familiar with like a traditional internship. So you're working it's virtual now because it's during COVID. You're helping this firm. Is that like an 8 to 5 deal through the day and then you take the classes at night? I mean, just walk us through that.
Sure. So there's two co-op terms that I was supposed to take in my 4 years as an undergrad. The first of which is your fall semester of sophomore year. So essentially, right, you have 5 classes you're responsible for that semester. I took them all the summer of my freshman year. So that summer, I took my sophomore year curriculum so that when I went in as a sophomore, I essentially had already taken those classes. And that semester, I was able to work essentially 9 to 5. I'd commute to the office or I'd work via Zoom from my apartment. And then I also did a full year or 2 semesters my junior year. And I front loaded some of those classes my sophomore summer and also would take some night classes to make up the difference. But it essentially left me in a position where I could have an uninterrupted schedule from 9 to 5 during those co-op terms.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a lot on the plate, though. I mean, kind of working full time and going to. I mean, a lot of people do that, but they're usually working adults, and they're going back to school for something, and it's a different situation. So, sounds like a really cool setup, and maybe just talk about how what your role was and what you were doing for these people.
So I'd say it was a mixture of two things. First, it was essentially just learning the business, right? So, what is insurance? What are investments? What is a retirement plan? And starting to just learn those basics. The other side of it was all sales, right? It was, hey, we want you to go out and start having productive conversations with people either in your community or, through lead generation and start having conversations and trying to bring people in to have conversations with you, but also with the firm. So those first couple years, it was essentially a lot of emphasis on building my own book and then having others do some of those more complex and higher level meetings for me.
And did you know that going into it, or was that something they just sprung on you after you got there? Like, oh yeah, by the way, we really need you to start getting out there and getting clients and selling stuff.
Sure. So I know a lot of firms, right? It's a little bit of a bait and switch where you get the job and then the first thing they say is, so tell me about your family. What do they do for work? It wasn't necessarily like that. I did know going into it that a considerable amount of the earnings that I would make would be through any clients that I was able to bring on. Given that I was in college, I felt I was in a position where even if I never brought on anybody, even if I just learned the business and learned how things work and made $0, it was still a really good use of my time as an undergrad.
Wow. Awesome mindset. I think you established that it worked out for you. But I want to go back to something. Here you are, 18, 19 years old, and they're saying you need to go. Like, how did that make you feel? Like, oh, I got to go out there and like talk to people and try to get them to do stuff and I don't really have a lot of, I have no experience and I'm just now learning. How did that make you feel?
It was tough, especially at first, right? There were people that would have conversations with me and just point blank say, "How old are you? You look like you're younger than my son or daughter." And most of the time I actually was. There was a lot of imposter syndrome at first, right? These are people that are in their peak earning years, and I'm having conversations with them around their finances, and they're considerably more quote unquote successful than I am. And it definitely took, I'd say, a few years before I really got comfortable saying, hey, I've worked with hundreds of families or seen hundreds of different clients and cases. You may have more experience in your work or your profession, but this is where I spend the majority of my time on a day to day. And it did take a while to get that experience and understand that I probably was competent enough to have those conversations with them. But it was a lot of trial by error too, right? Like there were a lot of rejections in those early years, me stumbling over my words or not knowing it, something super in depth and saying a lot of, I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to get you the answer, but at this point in time, I don't actually know. And that was a tough place to be. And I think I'm happy to now start being on the other side of that.
Why did you stick with it? All those rejections. Why didn't you just fold it and say, look, I'm going to go do something else like all my other people are doing and get a salary job or whatever. This is going to be a lot easier.
I'd say I was really just more fortunate than I probably deserved, Caleb. I was still in college, so my mindset was I can just stick with this until I graduate, and if at worst I make no money, at least I built the scar tissue to be able to handle the rejections and have those conversations with people. But I'll be very honest, if I was maybe, 23 years old when I had first started, and I had had all those rejections and felt like I wasn't making any money and I needed to pay my rent, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it as long as I did.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So at the end of you were there your whole college career, about 4 years. Is that right?
Correct. And then I was there about 6 months after I'd graduated from college as well.
Okay. And then maybe talk to us about that. So maybe you already answered this. Why didn't you stay?
So there was a lot of emphasis early on, right around sales, but there was also a considerable amount of effort put into just my education and development. And I really valued that. I wanted to get better as an advisor and learn not only how to have productive conversations, but I wanted the technical knowledge. And I'd say over the years I was there, when I was, I'd say probably a senior, some of the management started to turn over in the firm. And I had started to notice that there was a considerable amount of more time and effort put on the sales conversation as opposed to on the financial planning. And there was essentially a conversation that was had sometime around my senior year or right after I'd graduated, where a fellow advisor had asked a manager a question around deferred compensation. And the manager essentially said, you know what, screw the deferred compensation. I wouldn't focus on it too much. I can't sell anything on it, and it really only takes away from me being able to make a sale elsewhere. So why don't you just worry about figuring out how to have that conversation? And, it was 1099, so I didn't have a salary, but that day I essentially felt as if I was fired because I would never bring somebody into that world knowing that that was how they would treat clients and the way they were approaching planning. And it was at that moment I decided that I'd open up my natural market and say, okay, what opportunities are out there for me? Because I don't see myself staying here any longer.
Sounds like you were, I mean, from what I heard, trying to be loyal, but they sort of doubled down on we're not really going the financial planning route. We're going down more the product sale or doubling down the product sales route. So is that the catalyst that kind of forced you to start looking?
100%. They were an RIA, they were independent, but it felt like they were masquerading more as a team that wanted to make more sales as opposed to financial planning.
So talk about your search then. So now you're opening it up, and what did you do next?
So, thankfully, I had enough understanding of the industry. I knew I didn't want to go to an insurance firm or just a broker-dealer. I knew I wanted to be with an independent RIA where for a decent amount of time, the emphasis would simply be on learning the craft of financial planning, right? It's just as much technical as it is art, and I wanted somebody who recognized that and was willing to put me under their wing, essentially, and let me understand the industry in whole and also how I fit in that industry. So I started looking at, independent RIA firms and going down that route. And that's actually how we had gotten in touch as well, is during that time in my life, I reached out to you and we started to have
Yeah.
a conversation there too.
It's really good that you had a sense of the channels. And that's one of the reasons why we have the podcast and we put all the stuff out on the website and the book. There's so much confusion on the channels and the licensing out there, right? It sounds like, I mean, the job seekers that have a clear perspective of what channel they think they're out there, where they think they just do better. They get to where they want to go a lot quicker. So you narrowed it down to RIA, sort of mentorship, and then started talking to me, started talking to other firms. And then what happened? Were you able to get some prospects?
I was. So this was also around the time there was a little bit of an in between where I was still technically with my last firm, but I wasn't really very active. I wasn't prospecting and trying to bring clients on. During that period of time, I actually got my enrolled agent designation, which is a tax credential. Which gives
Nice.
me, thank you. It gives me some representation before the IRS, and I kind of leveraged that in some of the conversations I was having since I
Wait,
wanted.
wait a minute. I'm sorry to cut you. You got that while you were still in school?
I took one of the parts while I was still in school, and I studied for it while I was in school, and then took the
Nice
remaining 2
work.
parts afterward.
Okay, great work. All right, keep going.
Thank you. And yeah, so I kind of leveraged that from some of my interviews and conversations with firms. There were a few different associate financial planning and associate wealth planning positions that I was applying to. And I knew I was young enough at the time that if this position was to take me out of my home state of New Jersey at the time, I was very open to leaving because I knew probably what I was looking for was not casting the widest of nets and it might require me to move. So I kind of opened my search up to the whole country and said I'm willing to move somewhere for a few years and really dive into, what I consider to be a good position. And I kind of put that as my North Star over a location or over the pay or prestige of the firm.
You mean you didn't want to stick around with mom and dad any longer?
I love my parents, and if they're listening, I would love to hang out with you some more. But they also, I'll give them a lot of credit. Were very encouraging in that regard and said, "Hey, look, if you really believe that an opportunity that's not in New Jersey is the best place for you to be, we're gonna 100% support you in that endeavor."
And I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek because the trend, I mean, especially the Gen Z, and it could be just the financial, and that's probably a lot of like, they move back to the family. My generation's like, we already spent enough time with those people. We're done with them. So it's just been an interesting sort of cycle on sort of how that's going. But to have a new college grad say, I'll go anywhere in the country is kind of rare these days. It's like, no, I really want to be close to family. And COVID had a lot to do with that. And I get that. I totally get it. So you open, I mean, and look, Philly's a great market. I mean, there's tons of firms there. So you're saying I'll go anywhere. And then how did you find your current firm?
So when I was in this process, it's not just like leaving a current job going to a new job, especially at my old firm, because I did have some clients and some of them were people I was close to and I really cared about. So I wanted to get a really good understanding of what is the best way to leave your current firm, go to a new firm, especially when you're more or less starting your career. So I'd read some blogs, articles, and a couple of books on essentially what that looks like and getting a lay of the land. And one of the books that I read really resonated with me. And in the process of interviewing, I realized that the person interviewing me for one of the firms wrote the book that I had read. And that was, Dan Yerger, my current boss here, Dr. Dan. And I had read that book and then interviewed with the firm here out in Colorado.
Yeah,
My
getting your foot in the door. We've talked. Yeah, we had him on. We had him
Sure.
on. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's
Getting
the
how to
book.
get your foot in the door. Yeah, we'll link to it again.
It's a great book for any early or starting your career planner looking to kind of just understand where they fit in the industry and what to look for. It was really helpful in me kind of getting an understanding of where I fit and what I wanted.
So you had a handful of employers. Daniel was one of them. You notice he read the book, and then why did you end up going with their firm?
I'd say it kind of aligned with what I was looking for, right? There was a significant emphasis on mentorship and teaching. The way Dan had described it earlier on in my career was we want to run like a teaching hospital where, we're able to work with clients and you're able to observe and watch and learn, ask a lot of questions and really dive into the financial planning as both an art and a technical skill. And it actually required me to take a step back almost and become a paraplanner for 8 months. And I said, look, I'll learn more here as a paraplanner than I may somewhere else as an associate wealth planner. I'm willing to take the quote unquote pay bump or a step back in my career for a little bit because it might mean long term I'm able to take considerably more out of it than, the slight increase in pay I'd get somewhere else.
Okay, I just want to make sure I've got this right. So you left your comfortable sort of home base area. You took a step back in pay and role, and then you moved because it's not a virtual. You moved to Colorado. Why did you do? I mean, like no one does this. Like, why did you do this? I mean, you already kind of answered it, but I'm making a big deal about this because people don't do stuff like this. I mean, just can you give us a little bit more color on this?
I'd say I've gotten very comfortable with the unknown, right? So I said, look, I'd accepted this job in November of 2023, and I wasn't going to start until June of 2024. So I had a little bit of time to kind of put all my ducks in a row and really figure out where I was going to move, what that would look like. And I became very comfortable in the space of I don't know anything about Longmont, Colorado. I know nobody there, no social network or anything, but I had enough confidence that I could figure it out. So I kind of dove in headfirst to that and I said, look, if it doesn't work out at the end of the day, what is the genuine worst case scenario? Right? Let's say I moved out here. I'm here for 4 months. I'm really starting to realize I made a huge mistake. I can probably get out of my lease, and that might cost me $1,000 to $2,000. And my parents said I can move back home. At the end of the day, as a 23-year-old, that's not that bad.
Not a
Uh,
lot of downside there, really.
and I think that was really it. I think a lot of people just don't think about what is genuinely the worst thing that will happen. And that was the worst. And I said, that's not that bad. And thankfully enough, I'm still here. It hasn't gone poorly. I've built a social network and a professional network, and I'd say things have went pretty well. And I just have been very comfortable in the space of I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'll figure it out.
And talk to us about how Daniel and the other team members, how they, I mean, I'm not going to say if, because if it would be, you wouldn't be there, but how they've delivered on this teaching hospital and this mentorship and the apprenticeship, how have they delivered on that?
Well, I'd say it starts with the top, with just Dr. Dan, right? First and foremost, he is intentional about giving me and our other associate, Emily, a considerable amount of his day or week just to simply sit with us and ask a ton of questions. And from anybody that knows Dan, he loves to teach and is really great at doing so. There was a great amount of time those first couple of months where I'd sit in all of his client meetings and I essentially would have a page of notes with just questions, not only technical questions, but why did you ask this question this way? why did you phrase this as a yes or no question as opposed to an open-ended question? Or why didn't you bring this up in this particular context? And really just getting an understanding for not only the technical, but the artistic side of the conversation you have with families. And, I did that pretty much for about 8 months. I sat in every single meeting, took notes for every single meeting. And Dan also gives me a lot of leeway with preparation for client meetings, right? Obviously, he's overseeing all of my work and taking the time to dot the I's, cross the T's for me, but giving me the freedom and flexibility to try things out on my own. Say, hey, I built this plan or I did it this way. How do you think this works in the plan? Or did I do it wrong? And kind of being very patient and graceful with me in that process and allowing me to really dive into the work and not one have to go all in on sales from the beginning, but also not just do all the technical work and never speak in a client meeting and never have any input or say in how that conversation goes.
It's awesome. And he's also just a very strong advocate for the profession. I mean, I know him and we had him on the show, like I said, for the profession, also the next gen. He's always out there advocating, which I really appreciate. And I've told him as such. So any hurdles or struggles or, any sort of gotcha moments like, oh man, I really messed that up, or any surprises that you'd like to share, you can share that maybe will help some of the other new planners getting started?
Well, when you start in this career, there's two things you have to get really good at, right? And some firms emphasize one over the other, or the other over the other one. It's the technical knowledge, right? It's just simply knowing your stuff. And it's also client acquisition, business development, and being able to have productive conversations with people, recognizing a need in the community or online, and being able to fill that space. The technical knowledge is the technical knowledge. Whether you take your CFP, do the book work, take other credentials and designations, it's drinking through a fire hose in the first few years. It's really difficult to grasp all the comprehensive knowledge that really goes into a financial planning conversation. So I'd say for any new planner, that's simply you're going to cut your teeth, you're going to fumble over your words, you're going to mess up, and you're not going to know the answer to everything a client says. Whether you're a year in or 15 years in, that's just the reality of the conversation. But I think just mastering and doing your best trying to understand the technical knowledge will be challenging in the first few years. In addition to that, on the business development front, sales is hard. There's a reason, especially at a lot of sales oriented firms, most people, I think it's 90%, give or take, fail. And it's hard. It takes a lot of time and effort. And I think recognizing that beside maybe your family and those that love you, building a reputation as someone who does good work, who does great work, and does what they say they'll do, shows up on time, looks people in the eye, shakes their hand, speaks clearly. Developing that reputation takes time, and you won't get clients overnight, but you have to be very consistent with doing the ordinary things an extraordinary amount of time in that regard. And I think those two things will be challenging for any new planner simply because that's the reality of the industry.
Well, it's just a lot to learn. And then there's no real, again, formal training. But you're not in a sales position though right now. Are you getting clients? Is that part of your role?
Dan has an interesting perspective on this. I think a lot of associates don't have, right? So I think a lot of associates, it's truly just doing the technical work, right? And the analogy Dan likes to use is that is doing a lot of arm workouts, right? We're not doing any legs, essentially. And he says, well, I want to train their legs right now because in the future they will have to use them, as opposed to maybe other associate planning positions where it's simply using your arms. And then one day you're promoted to a position where you are required to do business development. And then that's the first time you do legs.
You're a little top heavy.
Right, right, right. So while it's not my day to day is not going to people's doors and trying to do business development, it is a part of my week because the reality is in this industry, if you want to be the best advisor you can, the person who has the technical knowledge really can only go so far. It does take a considerable amount of business development to drive new revenue and continue bringing in new clientele. And it's mastering both of those skills. So on a daily basis, I'm doing financial plans. I'm having, plan conversations with Dan and the team about building these plans, but I'm also fielding new consultations as they come in with Dan by my side and doing my best to develop a reputation within the community and give back, whether through the Longmont Chamber of Commerce or other avenues that I want to give back to.
I've seen you out there on LinkedIn putting out some stuff and maybe some articles or some blogs or something. So good work. Yeah, great. Daniel, this has been awesome. Great story. A lot of success. Glad to have you in the profession and glad you're doing well. Any final closing thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
No, thanks, Caleb. I'd say for final closing thoughts, I think it's important just to understand if you're a new planner, what you feel comfortable with, right? There will be some people who say, I don't want to do any business development. I really just want to focus on the technical aspect of the job. And there's other people who might be really comfortable in sales, but not feel very comfortable with the technical work. I think first and foremost, you have to learn the technical. I think it's really hard to do business development and feel good about it and sleep well at night if you really don't know what you're talking about. So I think for any new planner out there, getting in a position where you can just really grind on the technical aspect of the job first and foremost is going to be crucial. But then also understand that at a certain point, probably a little sooner than you would like to, you want to start developing the skills and mindset that business development is something you'll want to pursue, and just having that in the back of your head as you start to master the technical aspect of the job as well.
Daniel, thanks again for coming on.
Hey, well, thanks for having me, Caleb.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the New Planner Podcast. If you're ready to discover the top career paths for financial planners and see which track is best for you, we created a free guide to help you. Grab your copy of the Financial Planner Career Roadmap at newplannerrecruiting.com/roadmap. There, you'll also find more tools and resources all created to help you build a successful financial planning career. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, we're here to help you succeed.